Take a look at this map. Those red dots are oil tankers moving through the Strait of Hormuz before the US and Israel struck Iran. Now, look at the same map just 4 days later. Almost all of those dots are gone. And we all know why. Iran moved to choke off Hormuz, going after the Middle East's main oil route and the tankers moving through it. Now, here's the part that throws people off. America produces more oil than any country in history. So why can a narrow waterway on the other side of the world still hit Americans this fast? That sounds like it shouldn't happen. But it does. Because about 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas moves through that narrow stretch of water every day. So when traffic there starts drying up, markets react fast. And Americans feel it where they notice it first, at the pump. Gas costs more, fill-ups feel worse, and a conflict that looked far away starts hitting a lot closer to home. That's what we need to talk about. Now take a look at this chart. It shows something a lot of people find confusing. The United States is producing more oil than any country ever has. So why are Americans still paying more for gas? Because oil is a global market. That's really the whole story. More than 80% of the Gulf oil moving through the Strait of Hormuz is headed to Asia. Only about 4% goes to the Americas. So at first glance, this may not seem like America's problem, but it is. Because when a major route like Hormuz gets disrupted, less oil moves smoothly through the global system. Buyers start competing harder for the barrels that are still available, and prices go up everywhere, including in the US. So even if that oil was never coming to America, the price shock still can. And there's another part people miss. The US mostly produces light, sweet crude, which is easier to turn into gasoline. But many American refineries are built to handle heavier, more sulfur-rich crude, the kind that works better for diesel, jet fuel, and asphalt. And a lot of that heavier crude comes from the Middle East, along with Canada and Mexico. So when heavy crude from the Middle East gets disrupted, refiners have to pay more for alternatives. And once that happens, oil prices move higher across the board, including American oil. That's why Hormuz still matters. America may produce a huge amount of oil, but it still lives inside one global oil market. Right now, gas prices in the US are going up by around 5 to 6 cents a day. But once the media locks onto that story, the public reaction can grow even faster than the price itself. People are not just seeing higher numbers at the pump. They are hearing about gas prices on the news, seeing headlines on their phones, watching clips about it online, and getting the feeling that everything is starting to spiral. And that changes behavior fast. Now, compared with a lot of countries that have lower reserves and weaker energy security, the US is still in a better position. But that is not really how people experience it. For one trip, the extra cost may not sound devastating. The bigger effect is psychological. When people see gas prices rising every few days and the media keeps amplifying it, the fear spreads much faster than the math. People get nervous. They start cutting back. Businesses pay more to move goods. Then food, products, and everyday services start getting more expensive too. That is how a fuel shock moves through the economy. And in the US, it gets amplified even more because gas prices turn political almost immediately. So even if the direct financial hit may be lighter than in some other countries, the public and political reaction in America is usually faster, louder, and much more intense. Because once you look at that number on the pump, you are not just looking at oil anymore. You are looking at a whole chain of costs stacked on top of each other. This is where a lot of people get tripped up. Everybody hears the same oil news, sees the same headlines, and yet the price at the pump can still look very different depending on where you live. And that's because gas prices in the US do not come from one single number. They're built in layers. Crude oil is the biggest one, usually half the price or more. That's the part global disruptions hit first, especially when something goes wrong in a place like the Strait of Hormuz. Then you've got the cost of refining that oil into gasoline and moving it to local stations, and those costs go up fast when replacement crude is more expensive or harder to get. Then taxes enter the picture, and that is where states really start to separate. The federal gas tax stays the same, but state taxes vary a lot. That is one reason California ends up a lot higher than places like Texas or Mississippi. Then there's geography. States closer to oil fields, pipelines, or refineries usually have an edge. States farther away or harder to supply usually pay more. And regulation matters too. California, for example, requires cleaner fuel blends that cost more to produce, so when prices rise, they often rise faster there. So yes, the oil shock is national, but the number you see on the pump is still local. It gets shaped by crude, refining, transportation, taxes, geography, regulation, and competition. That is why one state can get hit a lot harder than another, even in the very same crisis. Now, I already know what a lot of people are thinking. Are the big oil companies using this crisis to make even more money? Because from the consumer side, it sure feels that way. Crude goes up, and gas prices seem to jump almost overnight. But when crude falls, gas prices somehow move like they're in no hurry at all. And people have noticed that pattern for years. Oil goes up 10%, gas jumps 15 to 20%. Oil comes down, and gas may only fall 5 to 10%. Prices go up like a rocket and come down like a feather. That is why people get so angry. And to be fair, there are real reasons for the suspicion. Big oil companies have posted massive profits in recent years. Critics also point to cases where refinery output was cut, tightening supply and helping keep prices high. So when gas jumps 17 to 20% during a Hormuz crisis, while crude may be up only 10 to 15%, people are obviously going to start asking questions. Now, the companies deny that this is price gouging. They say higher prices reflect real costs like refining, transportation, inflation, and plain old global supply and demand. Industry groups make the same argument. And in many cases, regulators do not find hard proof of illegal collusion, even when the pricing pattern looks awfully convenient. So legally, the picture stays blurry. But for regular people, it does not feel blurry at all. A fill-up costs more. Grocery bills rise with shipping costs. Families cut back. Trips get delayed. And a lot of people look at all of that and feel like somebody is doing just fine while everyone else gets squeezed. Maybe you cannot prove a clean crime in every case, but from the driver's seat, that distinction barely matters. People still watch prices shoot up fast, profits stay huge, and relief arrive slowly. And for most drivers, that unfair feeling is the part that sticks. At this point, you may be wondering, how bad could this actually get? And that is a fair question, because this is not the first time the Strait of Hormuz has been thrown into chaos. Back in the 1980s, during the tanker war, Iran and Iraq attacked ships in the Gulf, but oil kept moving because the US stepped in and escorted tankers through the region. This time, it is not that simple. The US still has overwhelming military power, of course. But the situation today is more complicated, and escorting ships the way America did back then is a much riskier move. The bigger historical warning is 1979. After the Iranian Revolution and during the Iran-Iraq War, major oil infrastructure was badly damaged. Global supply dropped hard, and gas prices in the US ended up doubling. Americans were stuck in long gas lines, and President Carter was telling people to conserve energy at home, even down to wearing sweaters instead of turning the heat up. That is the kind of oil shock people still remember. Now, the big difference today is that the US produces far more oil than it did in the 1970s or 1980s, so America is in a better position to absorb a shock like this than it was back then. But better does not mean immune. If the Strait of Hormuz stays blocked for long enough, this can still turn into the kind of crisis that drives up prices sharply, slows the economy, and starts looking a lot more like the oil shocks of 1979 and 1980. And that is really the point. The longer this drags on, the more pressure it puts on the US, not just economically, but politically too. So here's the real point. America may produce a lot of oil, but it still cannot escape a global oil market. And when Hormuz gets squeezed, the damage does not stay over there. It shows up here, At the pump, in shipping costs, in food prices, and across everyday life. That is why a narrow waterway half a world away can still hit Americans almost immediately. If this drags on, the pressure only gets worse. If this helped put the story into perspective, drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more breakdowns like this.